April 1945, the Soviet Union, the United States, and the remaining Allied forces are all fighting to put an end to the Nazi Party. Berlin was the capital of the Nazi Party in all of Germany. The city had taken over 200 years to establish into now one of the largest cities in Europe, holding a little over 4 million people. In the battle for Berlin was being assaulted on three sides at the hands of the Allied forces. The Russians began marching towards Berlin on the Eastern Front in November of 1944. The Western Allies started their march in June of 1944 with their landing on the Normandy beaches, also known as D-Day. From the east, Russia attacked Germany's last eastern defense lines found at the Oder and the Neisse rivers. Marshal George Zhukov led the attack on the Oder River, and Marshal Ivan Kaniv led the attack on the Neisse River near the town of Dresden. Stalin told Eisenhower of his plan to send Kaniv to attack Dresden, with Zhukov leading a second charge on Berlin. However, Stalin knew the Germans defending Kaniv's attack would be unable to hold up, which ultimately made his entire attack against Berlin. Zhukov and his men waited until 4 a.m. exactly to attack. At that time, 3 red flares were shot up into the sky, and 140 anti-aircraft lights were focused on German positions ahead. Next, 3 green flares were shot up into the air, and at that time, over 20,000 guns of all calibers fired on the enemy simultaneously. The explosions caused an atmospheric disturbance, and some men even bled from their ears. After just 35 minutes of fighting, all firing had stopped as Russian staff officers gathered in Zhukov's command bunker. Everybody was suffering from some degree of deafness, but after recovering from it, they learned of the first objectives having been successfully taken. Konev's attack was just as unforgiving as Zhukov's, except he used his artillery more selectively by picking out strongholds to attack prior to the advance itself. Konev wanted to not only beat Zhukov to Berlin, but also to beat the Western Allies. He feared that they would make separate peace with Germany if they got there first. However, this was only a misunderstanding, since it was made known in Washington that a surrender must be a surrender to all allies. In Konev's assault on the Neisse River, he picked out over 150 different crossing points for him and his army to advance from. His tankers were able to cover more than 10 miles in less than 8 hours, and he was less than 21 miles away from Lublin, in which the boundary between he and Zhukov's army would be gone. On Friday, April 27th, the Russians captured the Kreuzberg, which was the only elevation in the city that allowed artillery to hit the heart of the city. A few days later, the main post office held by Nazis was captured. On their way into the city, the district of Charlottenburg and Schöneberg were also taken over. Together, the Russians overran more than 100 blocks of buildings in the heart of Berlin. The last strongholds in Berlin are falling, according to a Moscow radio. On the other side of Germany, General Eisenhower of the United States led the charge. He and the other allies believed in rumor that claimed the Nazis were building a massive fortress that they would be able to hold out in for years. Eisenhower, upon reaching the Elbe River, decided to head south in search for this fortress that never was. He was able to capture the city of Bologna. Bologna served as a major stepping stone for the Allies, since it housed much of the transportation in the area, including railways and major roads. Another reason supporting Eisenhower's decision to head south can be attributed to the American attitude of wanting war to be over within Germany. Experts claim that seizing Berlin immediately on the Western Front could have extended the war by a few months. Eventually, General Eisenhower launched his final attack across the Rhine River with help from the Russians. During this western drive, over 1 million Germans were captured, and another 200,000 lie either dead or wounded. Just prior to reaching Berlin, the annual meeting place for Nazi officials, was raided by U.S. troops. The Allies made history when they met up in the town of Torg, having started 2,300 miles apart from one another. On the German side, General Gotthard Heinrici was leading the defense with only 744 guns. Keep in mind that the Russian force he was trying to defend against had over 20,000 guns. As the Allies closed in on Berlin, many non-combatants, such as the Hitler Youth, were being put on the front lines to defend the city. One of the tasks assigned to Hitler Youth was to defend the bridge of the Havel River. Before long, Nazi leader Heinrich Himmler made military training for the Hitler Youth an everyday affair. By now it was becoming clear to all Berliners that Fortress Berlin was just a myth after they realized how ill-prepared the city was to withstand an attack. Many of the defenses, including trenches, anti-tank ditches, barricades, and gun positions, were not only on the outskirts of town, but far from being completed as well. However, the most important resource German defenses lacked was manpower. German General Helmuth Rehmann believed that they could defend the city with 200,000 fully trained soldiers, but what they had consisted of only 60,000 untrained home guardsmen. By Saturday, April 21st, air raid shelters became the new permanent living quarters for civilians. On Sunday, April 22nd, the first civilian casualties were reported outside of local grocery and butcher shops. Once this happened, many civilians fell into a state of chaos, and the looting of stores began. Towards the final days of battle, civilians relied heavily on wine since water was becoming increasingly harder to find. In the first 17 days of April, over 4,000 German planes were destroyed, according to an Army Air Force officer. As he described it, most were sitting ducks due to their shortage of fuel. Hitler ordered his men to fight to the death, and anybody who gave command to retreat should be arrested, if not executed immediately. Because of this, the Allies were expecting a fight with no formal surrender. Many Nazis feared what would happen to them if the city was captured by Russians, given all they had done to each other over the years. Heinrich Himmler supposedly tried to make one last unconditional surrender plea, but it would only be the Western Allies and not Russia. As the Russians closed in, dozens of German suicide reports were coming in. All German suicides have two things in common: a feeling of general insecurity and lack of future perspective. Carrying cyanide capsules with you became a regular thing, and some even say that the local health authorities distributed them to the public. In one case, Reich Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels poisoned his children and ordered guards to kill him and his wife with machine guns. In the Nazi regime, 8 of 41 regional party leaders, 7 out of 47 police leaders, 53 out of 554 army generals, 14 out of 98 Luftwaffe generals, 11 out of 53 admirals, and Hitler himself committed suicide. Hitler prepared for his death on Monday, April 30th. He began by gathering everybody from his bunker in the Chancellery air raid shelter to shake hands in silence. After that, nobody saw him again. He took his regular lunch at 2 p.m., and at 3:30 p.m. a report was made that he had shot himself in the head with his wife, who had taken poison. Hitler died at the age of 56, 12 years and 3 months after he established the Third Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years. It was also 3 days after his Axis partner, Benito Mussolini, had been killed. For those not on duty, they became aware of the news after they saw people smoking cigarettes, something Hitler forbid in his presence. Hitler's funeral was simple. The bodies of him and his wife were carried out into the garden and drenched in gasoline so that his remains could be burned. The Germans announced his death as having met a heroic death, dying in the savage battle for Berlin, but not giving specific details regarding how he died. It was broadcast over German radio with a 54-minute build-up followed by a 3-minute silence. In that broadcast, Navy Commander-in-Chief Karl Donitz was to succeed him. Once Hitler was gone, the entire Nazi party fell apart and was left in ruins. Huge waves of Nazi soldiers surrendered to the Red Army, and even more headed west to surrender to the Western Allies. About a week later, Germany was forced into an unconditional surrender. The events that followed were some of the most frightening of all American history: the Cold War.